Hey guys, it's Tara. Welcome back to the Three Bookshelves. Today I'm going to give you my Owls Readathon wrap-up. But Tara, you might be saying, you didn't make a TBR for this readathon. You haven't even mentioned this readathon at all. That is true, but I didn't know about this readathon until about a week into April. My TBR was already done. I was halfway through my first book of the month, but how can I pass up a readathon based on anything in Harry Potter? The Owls Readathon was hosted by Book Roast, and I just realized I don't know her actual name, sorry. The idea is that you take the Owls exams by reading books that fit for each class at Hogwarts. So for example, if you take the Divination Owl, you would read a book that deals with prophecies. If you're taking the Potions Owl, you read a book about alchemy, and so on. Book Roast will also be hosting a Newt's Readathon at some point, and just like in Harry Potter, if you don't have an owl in that class, you can't take the Newt exam for it. So if you don't read a book for Defense Against the Dark Arts in this readathon, that's not going to be an option for you in the next readathon. Like I said, I already had my TBR set for the next 3 months, but luckily at least 3 books on that TBR fit pretty well into the Owls categories. 3 past Owls would have given me a grade of exceeds expectations. But if I'm in this thing, I'm in it all the way. I want that top grade. I want the outstanding. To get outstanding, you have to read 5 books, past 5 Owls. So let's see how I did. The first Owl exam I sat was for Charms, and for Charms you had to read a fantasy book. Pretty easy. For that one, I chose A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by George R.R. Martin. This is a collection of 3 novellas that are set in the world of George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series, but about 100 years before the events of that series. And it follows the newly knighted Sir Duncan the Tall and his young squire Egg, who is actually Aegon Targaryen V and will eventually be crowned king and sit the Iron Throne. The first novella, The Hedge Knight, is the origin story. It's where Dunk first meets Egg, where they team up for all their adventures, and Dunk competes in a tourney that changes the course of the Targaryen dynasty. In the second, The Sworn Sword, Dunk is the sworn sword to a has-been knight and has to resolve the conflict between that knight and a lady who holds neighboring lands. And in the third, The Mystery Knight, Dunk and Egg attend another tourney and uncover a conspiracy to start a new rebellion. My hand already hurts, so that's going up there. As a massive fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, first of all, it's just great to read anything in that world and with the history that I already know and love, but also to see the Targaryen dynasty alive, if not entirely well, and to meet a whole bunch of different Targaryens and get to know them a little bit, and to get a lot of information on the Blackfire Rebellion, the first Blackfire Rebellion, and to witness the second Blackfire Rebellion. I really liked The Hedge Knight. It was definitely my favorite of the 3 novellas, and I liked The Sworn Sword the least. I think it could have been taken out of the series, and the other 2 would have made a fine duology. I loved Egg so much. He was so full of sass and attitude and arrogance for somebody so young, but he was a big softie at heart. He was so loyal to Dunk, and he had such a big personality for somebody so small, and not just in his stature, because he was this little guy, but as a character, he was a much smaller character than Dunk. He wasn't on screen very much, but when he was, he stole the show. I think Egg had more personality than Dunk, and we were in Dunk's POV the whole time. Dunk was a little bit underwhelming. I liked him well enough, but he was just too much of a good guy. I like morally gray characters, and Dunk was not morally gray, and it was a little bit frustrating watching him try to hold on to his honor and making some decisions that probably weren't that smart in the name of his honor. I definitely look forward to more Dunk and Egg. I think there are supposed to be between 6 and 12 novellas in the Dunk and Egg series, but who really knows with George R.R. Martin anymore? I would give A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms 3 stars overall. Probably would have been 4 stars if The Sworn Sword wasn't so boring. For the Muggle Studies Owl, you had to read a Muggle nonfiction book, and for that I went with Rise of the Dungeon Master by David Kushner and Koren Shadmi. This is a graphic novel, part biography of Gary Gygax and part history of Dungeons & Dragons. My husband has been playing D&D for most of his life. He got me into it a few years ago, and I've been playing on and off since then with his group. It was nice to learn more about Dungeons & Dragons, but I think this book could have been done better. The narrative jumped around a lot and it jumped back and forth between the second-person perspective of the narrative and first-person perspective in the speech bubbles, and it just made it really confusing to get through. I also wish there had been color. It was just all black and white, and it's just 3 stars for this book. It's not terrible, but I think there's probably a better history of D&D out there. Next up, I did the Defense Against the Dark Arts Owl. For that, you had to read a book about secret societies or secret clubs, and for that, I chose The Archived by Victoria Schwab. Now that I've read this book, I think I can give a better synopsis than the messes I came up with in previous videos. The Archive keeps the recorded history of the life of every person who's ever lived, but not in books or on computers or anything like that. There are actually copies of the people. They are sentient bodies. But the problem with storing memories in sentient bodies is that sometimes they wake up and they get out of the archive. Enter our protagonist, Mackenzie Bishop. She's a keeper for the archive, and it's her job to track down the histories that get out and to return them to the archive before they can cause any havoc in the real world. The story itself follows Mackenzie as she discovers an unsolved murder mystery in the old restored hotel that her family just moved into, and in trying to investigate that, she stumbles into a plot to bring down the entire archive itself. So I enjoyed this book. I did. I liked Mackenzie a lot. I loved how she had to struggle to balance her double life with her family on the one hand and her archive life on the other. I really liked the interludes of Mackenzie sort of having a one-sided conversation with her late grandfather, who had passed on the mantle of keeper to her. And I always love a good murder mystery, and Victoria Schwab just writes beautifully. But here's the thing. The world building in her Shades of Magic series was phenomenal, but she doesn't put nearly as much or nearly enough world building into her YA series. That was my main gripe about the Monsters of Verity duology, and it was my main gripe about the Archive too. We are told what the Archive does, but not why or how. Why are these histories being kept? What are they being used for? Who are they benefiting? Do they have any actual purpose? And why are they kept in sentient copies of the person's body? Why not just on a hard drive or something? How are they creating the bodies? Are they flesh and blood or something else entirely? How are they getting the memories from the actual person's brain into these copy bodies? Maybe we don't need to know all these things to appreciate the plot itself, but not knowing them makes the whole thing really hard to believe and accept because it just doesn't make sense. And what really bothered me was, how are the histories getting out of the archive? They're kept in what are essentially tombs that can supposedly only be opened with a librarian's key, yet the histories are opening them from the inside. I don't know how, but they're doing it, and they make a lot of noise when they get up. And there's a lot of librarians all over the archive at any given moment, and as far as we know, there's only one way out, through the front door, and to get to that, you have to pass the front desk, where usually there's a librarian stationed. So tell me, how are these histories getting up and walking out without anybody noticing? How? Why aren't there guards anywhere in the archive? Why don't they just keep keepers in the archive to stop the histories from getting out in the first place? Why aren't the histories restrained or sedated? Why can they open their drawers from the inside at all? Where's the security in this place? Maybe some of these questions are answered in the second book of the series, I don't know, but those issues are so problematic that they shouldn't have been left for some reveal in the sequel. They should have been addressed in this book. All of that implausibility kept me from loving this book. I think it would have been really great with more world building. We don't need to know every detail, but we should know enough that it makes more sense than it did. In the end, I give The Archived 3 stars. I will definitely be reading The Unbound, probably for the Newts Readathon, but I don't think this duology is ever going to earn a spot on my favorite shelf. Next up is Arithmancy, and for that, Owl, you had to read a book with a number on the cover or in the title, and for that I read The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Yes, these are Roman numerals, but I'm going to count it, especially since arithmancy is basically a scientific method of predicting the future, and in this book, the protagonist uses science to travel to the future, so it counts, okay? I wanted to read this book for a long time because H.G. Wells is one of the fathers of modern science fiction, and I also have a thing for time travel. Woo! Woo! That's the worst hard sound ever. The Time Machine is about a 19th century scientist who builds a time machine and travels very far into the future to the year 800 something thousand, and humanity has vastly changed. Humans have become these docile, childlike creatures. They live in this perfect society where there is no war or violence or disease or any kind of hardship whatsoever. But the time traveler realizes that might not be the case when his time machine goes missing. The book opens with some very sciencey stuff about how time is the fourth dimension, and it's explained really, really well. It made more sense to me than most of the explanations I have heard for that theory. But it quickly veers away from science fiction and into more speculative philosophy as the time traveler theorizes how humanity got to the point it did. The story itself is really interesting with how the human species and society has evolved into two very different branches, but the 19th century style of writing is definitely not what I'm used to. After the first chapter, the entire rest of the story is just the time traveler telling a group of friends about his adventure after he's returned from the future. So even the scenes with action and suspense fall flat because they feel like something that's being described after the fact rather than something that's happening in the moment. And there is literally zero dialogue throughout most of this book because of the language barrier between the time traveler and the people of the future. So it's just these big, massive paragraphs, one after another through the entire book. So once again, I'm going to say 3 stars. It was a great plot. It was great speculation on where humanity might end up if it continues on its current trajectory. But overall, the antiquity of it just left it a little bit too dry. And last but not least, Astronomy. For the Astronomy Owl, you had to read a science fiction novel. Go figure. And for that, I have Illuminae by Amie, Kaufman, and Kristoff. This was actually the first book I read in April. It was the one that I was halfway through when I heard about the readathon, but I left it to the end of the wrap-up so I could end on a high note. Because, oh my god, you guys! Illuminae kicks off when a small mining planet is attacked by a big corporation who wants the mining industry for itself, and a group of survivors are able to escape the planet on 3 ships, but the big corporation sends its own warship after them. But that's not the only problem they have to deal with, because a deadly plague is breaking out on board one of the ships, and the AI mainframe of another ship is starting to turn against them. The story itself follows Katie, a hacker, and Ezra, a fighter pilot, who coincidentally broke up about 10 minutes before the whole thing started going down, and now they have to work together to survive. And the story is told in a mixed media format. There are interviews and video surveillance transcripts and emails and IMs and the really interesting, kind of eerie recorded data of the AI's thought process. The mixed media format is what drew me to this book, along with all the hype, because there is a lot of hype. But as soon as I started reading it, I started worrying that a story told through things like IMs and video transcripts would be a story told instead of shown. That all changed when I got to a certain lab report about 150 pages in. This, I thought, was a science fiction novel, and it is, but nobody told me this was also a horror novel. Having that sneak up on me like that was amazing, because I am a big fan of horror. I was not expecting it in this book, and it was so subtle, but gruesome at the same time. It was chilling and creepy and just ugh. And after that, I was totally hooked. I can't really say much else about what I liked or didn't like about this book without getting really spoilery, but I will say that there is one hell of a plot twist in this book. I live for plot twists, and this one did not disappoint. The whole book did not disappoint. There is so much hype for the series all over BookTube, and I get it now. It is so worth the hype. It is so worth the hype. Needless to say, 5 stars for Illuminae, and it is taking me a hell of a lot of willpower not to throw the rest of my TBR out the window and go get Gemina and Obsidio, because I want to read them right now. So yes, I did achieve 5 owls and the top grade of outstanding. Even if I had to sneak 2 really tiny books in to do it, they still count, and I still did it. Yay me! Thank you to Book Roast for hosting this readathon. It was such a great idea, and I can't wait for the newts. And thank you to everyone else for watching this wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a like, subscribe, you know the drill. And if you participated in the Owls readathon, let me know what books you read and how many owls you got. And until next time, everybody, happy reading. Bye-bye.